going to talk about connections or neural nets, as what's commonly known. Then we're going to talk about optimization. So once we know how the brain works, we can also intervene to help improve processes. This may be for medical reasons, due to brain injury, or it could be just fun, which is what I'm glad to hear for. So we're just going to talk about ways in which we can optimise the way we think and optimise things like the dual supply of the brain, which can have dramatic effects on cognitive performance and mental performance, especially when we're completing high load and difficult tasks. Okay, so why hack the brain? Well, a hacker, according to ESR, this is the first entry in Eric Raymond's jargon part, he says a hacker is a person who enjoys exploring the details of programmable systems and how to stretch their capability, as opposed to most users who prefer to learn only the minimum necessary. Okay, this is a pretty excellent description of what cognitive neuroscientists are trying to do when they understand how the brain works and how our thought process. However, we can't really think of the brain in terms of a programmable system. Okay, the metaphor only goes so far. Actually, I've just got a very good bit from July's Scientific American, who's an article by a neuroscientist called Christian Koch. He spent a lot of time investigating things like consciousness and so on. He's actually really related to Francis Crick, the guy who understood the double helix structure of DNA and so on. Won a Nobel Prize. And once you've won a Nobel Prize, you're allowed to say anything you want. So he's decided to go with consciousness and so on with Christian. And this is a really good quote, which really explains where the metaphor between computers and the brain kind of stretches to infinity. Cook was among the few challenges to pervading metaphor, equating the wiring of the human brain with the circuitry of a computer. Instead of accepting the idea that thought results from the combined action of billions of neurons, each relatively simple component, he asserted that the individual neurons carry out complex computations. Indeed, mounting evidence shows how the neural cells function not only as a network of linear threshold devices, relaying electrical pulses or not, but also as individuals working autonomously and adaptively. So here we have a situation where each neuron in the brain adapts to what it should be doing. Okay, so you can't really think of a computer as an electronic brain. It has very lots of simple components which define things, and this builds up into big emergent properties. The brain seems to be somewhat different. Each neuron is a very, very complex system and adapts and changes. And actually in this neuroscience guy, Christian Koch, for some reason this is bizarre, but Hello magazine article in here. And the other thing it says in here is, neurobiologists have since given up the notion that Koch made a dangerously obvious, despite his having tattooed his arm last summer with the Apple computer logo, to demonstrate his love of the Macintosh. So maybe we can't entirely believe everything he says. It's a bit of an extremist. Anyway, so the idea that brains and computers are different things is quite important. In fact, neuroscience talks a lot about computational metaphors, but we don't ever assume that when we're modelling things on computers that is what the brain does and vice versa. Okay, so why is it necessary that we hack the brain? Firstly, to create effective treatments and people with brain injuries. We spend a lot of time looking at ways in which we can improve the way that people task, the way people handle their cognitive processes, like memory and so on. To get a better understanding of ourselves and others, you guys are happy to know more about
our connection is stable.
Gaining knowledge for the fun of it is a real hit. And so we simply look at cognitive neuroscience the same way, but find stuff out just like that. And also to answer some fundamental philosophical questions about how we relate and understand the world around us. So, through thousands of years, people have argued about
we aren't getting any
how
water
we
here.
understand the world and what our relation to the world. Finding the cognitive neuroscience some of these experiments are finding out how our understanding of the world matches the brain function. Okay, so interesting thought stuff. Reverse engineering, understanding the brain's mechanisms, processes, and systems. Optimization, trying to improve brain function. Okay, reverse engineering. How does the brain work? We want to optimize something. We need to understand that the brain has no documentation, specification, very poor specifications, yeah, but it does everything you want it to do. It has the single most intuitive user interface of any information device you know, but we have no idea how it works. This means the only option we have to understand the brain is to reverse engineer it. Okay, so when you get some software and you want to work out how it works, or most often you want to track it, so it doesn't really exist and so on. First thing you need to know is what is it doing to enable the detection, what's it doing to do X and Y and so on, and this is exactly the problem we have. We know what it does, we can see its behaviour, but what we don't know is what are the components, what are the underlying mechanisms. We can tackle the problem in various ways. We can look at the cognitive level, okay, that's just behavioural level, measuring behavioural things, or we can look at the neural level, okay, what is happening in the biological system while all these small processes are going along. And actually this distinction is a bit of an artificial one, in the same way as software and hardware is an artificial distinction. Okay, so hardware may exist without software, but software doesn't really exist without hardware. Okay, so we can think of the cognitive and neural levels in a similar way, in the fact that they're both different angles of looking at the same thing. Okay, the first thing we use is studies of healthy people. Actually, we say normal people, healthy people, what we mean is the psychology undergraduate from Harvard. They get wheeled in and tested on various stuff. And this is just a way of creating experiments to help us understand how different thought processes tackle different problems. Okay, so here's an example of this. This is work done by Nikita et al. And they were interested in the role of meaning in recall, in memory. So what does the meaningfulness of a particular text or so on, how does that influence how people recall that information? And he asked novice and expert programmers to recall some source code after a quick presentation. Okay, so what I want you to do is going to be some source code out on the screen. Okay, that's going to be some very basic C. I'm going to give you sort of watch on it. Okay, and what I want you to do is look at this. Right, I'm going to give you 10 seconds and see how well you can remember it. Okay. Now, if you have a pen and paper now, and I'll ask you to write that out, people who know C programming, or even programmers in general, will do far better at that. Because they can take the information and understand its meaning. So SRAM, the person who wrote the program, may not mean what to them, and they simply have to be remembered as a string of characters. As programmers, you can chunk that information to more meaningful blocks. And in fact, it was found that programmers record this information a lot more easily. They also did an experiment where the same source code, randomized, was presented. Vastly more complex. So if you think, before you could program, or even some of your non-programmer friends, when they see the first thing, yeah, they see the little bit of C code, that's what it looks like. Yeah, it looks like nonsense. And in fact, if you get both expert and novice programmers recall lists bit of code, they do identical. Okay, so here's an example of the meaning of what's being shown, really influencing how well we remember. And this is also a demonstration of how we can simply do experiments on healthy people and find out information about how do our psychological processes, how does our brain tackle certain problems. Okay, as well as simply looking at the cognitive behavioural level, making how well people do on certain tasks, we can also look at how their brains actually do things when they're undergoing certain things. We use a technique called functional imaging, which is a way of measuring brain activity whilst people are doing things. There's a common method of fMRI, which involves being put in massive magnets, and then, yeah, I'll skip this as it's because I don't think you understand it. Something to waiting away with big magnets. It's impressed me so far. So. PET is where they inject you with radiation and then scan your head with big magnets, and they just get you to do a task and they look where the radiation accumulates in your brain, and that will be the level of light activity. In fact, PET and fMRI both work on oxygen and glucose. Okay, so what the fMRI is doing is really measuring where most glucose is being, oxygen is being metabolized, and PET simply does the same with oxygen. So these are the measures of activation of the brain. EEG and ERP, when you see the kind of sensory swipe on movies, it's all wind up, all this stuff. Yeah, that's exactly what it's doing. It's just measuring electrical activity from the scalp and then working out how that relates to the brain. Okay, so I'm just going to show you an example of fMRI scan. This is a task where people ask them the faces compared to exactly the same thing, but the contrast balance is messed up, so it didn't look like a face. So really, with all sorts of brain scanning, it's subtraction on the whole. All of your brain is active all the time. Okay, the myth that we only use 10% of it inside is completely different. If you think that's true, you see people with bits of their brain missing. They a very small amount of brain to do it. It's very awful once you know what they're missing. This is just going to be a picture of someone looking at pictures of faces compared to contrast balance messed up version. And you can see here that we have this whole area at the back of the head. This is the fusiform gyrus, like the visual system, practical parietal lobe. And so what we're seeing here is which bit of the brain is most active when seeing faces compared to seeing non-face stuff. This is fMRI, so this is going, these bits of the brain are using more glucose in face task than non-face task. In fact, we know that this area of the brain is particularly involved in understanding faces and not anything else. That really shows you. I went to talk about it at Brooklyn Diffie, and he was talking about public key encryption, and he did this kind of cool experiment where he said, what is the most important security measure you take every single day of your life? And the answer was recognizing people. And this is probably one reason why we have this whole area of the brain that's involved in recognizing faces. Because really that's essential to our well-being and security and so on. As well as reading off activation, we can also kind of add in a bit of activation. Neuroscience has a really bad habit of getting untested technology and adding it in the brains of people. Randomly what happens. Some of it's come out rather badly. Transcranial magnetic stimulation has come out very well. Great, basically magnetic pulses, and you just send them into someone's brain and it stops a bit. How do you do that? Wow. Yeah, if you think the brain electrical system, you have magnetic pulses, what happens is it disrupts. People stimulate depending on that area of the brain. And it only works for like a millisecond, and it's completely reversed. I've had this done to me, and get shots of it going off, so it's like a technical TMS that temporarily stops the ability of the brain while you're doing a task. It'll do the same thing without it, so you can see whether that part of your brain is necessary. You ever get to have a go, it's really good fun. It makes the work all multiple kinds of switch. Magnetic impulse going in, so it's not an electrical system. The muscle is also an electrical system, so every time it goes on, that holds your face. You feel really elated afterwards, and no one knows why. So, if you feel like having the brain temperature, just sign up on the experiment. Okay, yeah, this is some TMS equipment. This is like a big two relay coil. Basically, they just switch it on. Just stand there on the head. And then after about 3 minutes, the guy will go, it's overheating, I'm getting you. Okay, this is the effects of TMS in the brain. So this is MRI scan of the brain. And you can see that it's graphed out the effect of the magnetic impulse on the brain structure. The red line is where it's strong enough to depolarize neurons. So this is the complete electrical charge. Okay, recording single brain cells. This is where you get an electrode, you put it in the brain, and all the activity of a single brain cell. We can either record activity between the brain cells, or we can activate them by putting out this thing. And it sounds a lot worse than it is. This is usually done concurrently with neurosurgical procedures. Okay, you use some of the brain ops. You can't even get psychology or drug to do that. When people have very severe epilepsy, which is called the normal fits, these can be potentially fatal. The last resort is actually to remove the part of the brain, which is the focus of this sort of stuff. And before neurosurgery, obviously we want to work out which fits the room. And I'll use depth electrodes, which are these, record electrical activity from the brain to work out exactly where the focus is coming from. However, while someone is undergoing this, there have been a lot of experiments done where they're asking, while we're kind of like doing stuff, you might be just do some things to the brain. Okay, so this is a study by Figel et al. And they granted depth electrodes for exactly the same reason as last time for on the focus of epileptic activity. They were interested in the phase process. What we did is we brought depth electrodes into this guy who was undergoing brain surgery. All brain surgery is done while unconscious, because you have no nerves as such in the brain, you can't feel anything. So just a little low anesthetic. On the whole, they like to be conscious so you can walk to everything available. In this case, what they're doing is they're running depth electrodes and stimulating areas that they thought might be involved in phase process. They put this in an area of the brain called the anterior frontal gyrus. And this is what the patient reported. The patient would be doctored by that. And the patient goes, I've seen many faces that appear. Faces that appear are in mine. No, a succession of portraits passing by. There's not familiar faces. No, we might say of television celebrities, faces of people that you might encounter here in their life. Faces of many faces lasting seconds. Essentially by putting a tiny electrical current into a certain area of the brain, this person is actually hallucinating faces. Now what this tells us is that this area must be very highly involved in understanding faces and face process. This is actually done fairly rarely. This is known and done when people have certain surgery and so on. However, that's pretty useful technique. Connection with the neural nets. Okay, we can build neural networks to simulate cognitive psychological processes, and then you can break them to find out what might go wrong. Okay, this is just a very basic diagram of a feed-forward back propagation neural network into the diagram. And this is a very simple neural network which just the input goes here and it flows forward to the output. Now, all the units here do is they're called hidden units, and they essentially just take this data and they do some reasonably basic math for it, and they just want to match the input pattern to the output pattern. So what happens if I wanted to identify someone by their face, I could have a whole load of those here, each corresponding to a single pixel, and then I could just go show it to here, and then ask the output side, output John. And it would have a guess, and I would go, no, you're wrong, it's someone else. And then it would change the activation all the way back to this error propagation, and it would keep cycling this process. It's like training. So you don't program neural nets to train it by going, here's the stimulus, here's 101, the neural net goes, am I correct? And you go, yes or no, adjust itself if it's wrong, then it gets it correct. And there's a whole load of different sorts of neural networks. This is one of the most basic. And this was actually used to simulate the effects of context within schizophrenia. Okay, so this is just a modelling of a certain contextual process in schizophrenia. So we damage this and then see if it can make useful predictions about schizophrenic behaviour. We can also look at the studies of brain patients. This is from Tony Mitchell from UCL Packaging. He said, you don't know what your doctor has got. She was talking about like birds and trees and flowers and stuff, but it works just as well for studying brain intelligence. Okay, this is actually a reconstruction of discovered a guy called Phineas Gage. He was a railway worker in 1848 in Vermont, and his job was to drill holes in rocks, pack them with dynamite, and stuff them down with big iron rod. And unsurprisingly, he really became our first and most important expert in understanding brain mutations. His big iron bar caught the rock, caused the spark, basically brought this iron bar through his head like this. Surprisingly, after it went through his head and went some 20 years of time, suddenly he sat down afterwards, he was completely coherent. His men stuffed him on the cart, sent him home, and he was out none of it, he got off and walked with my toes. What we was found out was the damage to this area, frontal area, really affected how he interacted socially, and how he could regulate his emotions and so on. He was the first evidence that big areas of the brain may be involved in specific Okay, this is area of people gyrus and scans, brain scans of the areas of the back gyrus we know this is the case largely from evidence from prosopagnosia into a face point. Damage this area, people, prosopagnosia patients can't understand faces, so they understand everything else. We wouldn't guess this just from walking around, because for me, the whole world looks seamless, the faces don't look different. People have still brain damage. Don't understand faces, even though they understand things like sunsets and stuff like this. And this is a CT scan from the showing prosopagnosia. And you'll notice that the same areas on the right hand side of the camera. So in this way, we can understand how the brain works by looking at people that have brain injury and can can't do our brain. Okay, optimization. Yeah, physically messing with your brain, it looks enormously good fun, as good as it is, but make sure it's good your brain, you know what I mean? No, seriously, brain always amazes me how much damage the patients do when they function. However, it also amazes me how quickly it can go wrong. I use drugs and so on, I mean, it's one of your own choice, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I can't take those drugs. So we get so most drugs will optimize a certain bit of the brain at a certain amount of time. Most have very long-term effects, detrimental. So make sure we're fully educated about that when we try and home optimization of drugs. I'm not going to talk about drugs. What I'm going to talk about is sort of mental ways in which we can optimize home tackling processes, and also how we can optimize the fuel supply, those revisions, and dramatically improve performance over a very short amount of time. Okay, practice makes perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what everyone didn't want to hear. You know what I mean? The last thing people want to hear is just go and practice. Fortunately, it does make you very good at something. And in fact, we know that the prefrontal cortex, the frontal brain, is heavily involved in taking actions and making them less conscious. So when you first start to drive a car, reading the type, when you were typing, you had a look on the keyboard and look exactly where every key was. After a few years, you don't even have to think about typing. It becomes far less conceptual. That's why also when we learn to drive, it's very difficult to talk and drive. Once you've been doing it for years, you're quite happy to do so. Prefrontal cortex is to take these very novel actions and make them a lot more dramatic. So the more we practice on this, the more it becomes procedural, better will it be. And in fact, in some brain patients, this process breaks down. So they can't control automatic actions. And you get syndromes where people can't stop doing things presented by the environment. So they walk out the door and they'll fly out the door. And they'll come to them trying to pick up and drink it, even if they know it's too hot and it's going to burn. So we can see the system break down and brain damage is part of the reason why you know it's there. Okay, increasing meaning. You saw in an earlier experiment that understanding something's meaning can really help us when we try to forward. So we can try and make things information rich. There's lots of very simple techniques you can use to try and help you recall stuff, especially when that stuff is particularly meaningless to you. If you try and attach meaning to it, you will recall it far better. This is, in fact, the basis of lots of improved memory techniques you see on emerging techniques. What I tend to do is, when you're trying to remember a whole list of random unassociated stuff, just imagine you're walking down the street and every short you'll go to one of these things in it, trying various techniques. Visualizing what you're trying to remember is also very good, because there's a whole load more information going on. Yeah, so if I give you a list of words, and you string them together into visual stories as you go, that will actually bind them with a lot of meaning and help you really come to the truth. Optimizing brain conditions. Brain works best when it comes to body. There's increasing evidence that high-fat diets may impair brain function. Particularly it seems that high-fat diets reduce the amount of glucose metabolism in the brain. And glucose metabolism is particularly important, not simply because it's the brain's fuel, but also because it's kind of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, particularly important for memory. Glucose is involved in the second part of that, which has some role in brain function. B vitamins seem particularly important in neurocortical health. We're doing some research at the moment with Gerlach and Kings on B vitamins and neurocortical function. But it seems the consensus is that B vitamins are quite important, especially when you're older. Actually, when you're below the age of 50 and so on, they're important for brain functioning, but it's really important to have them when you get over the age of 50. We've seen a lot of these sort of tasks that at high demand, at high load, the effects are far more apparent than if you just kind of doing everyday stuff. And so you notice that Red Bull has basically caffeine, sugar, vitamins, and most energy drinks have so for exactly the reason. Okay, optimizing the fuel supply. This is the single best way you can get a performance kick out of your brain in very short order. And this is essentially what functional imaging techniques we talk about brain scanning rely on. So fMRI relies on glucose metabolism in the brain, oxygen metabolism, and PET relies on glucose metabolism. So these work from fMRI can work on a second-by-second basis. So these changes occur very quickly as you think about it. If I stop talking, the glucose metabolism to the left side of the brain will drop because I'm not using the language areas and so on. The brain is the most energy-hungry organ in the body. It takes about 20% of our total energy intake, but it's only about 2% of our total body weight. It's built with a major flaw in that it can't still do it, and that's why it's very important. That's why brain damage is so difficult to deal with. And the brain's demand for optimal glucose increases over high load conditions. Okay, this is a graph with level of optimal glucose in blood time. Okay, you can see this part here is where it's been a high cognitive load task, it's a very difficult task. And you can see that this is the baseline, this is what will happen without the task. As soon as you put in a high cognitive load task, the level of glucose or oxygen drop. Okay, so you can use that very quickly. Okay, so how do we go about using this knowledge to be able to boost our cognitive performance? Small increases in glucose and oxygen can provide these boosts as long as they're well timed. 50 milligram glucose drink significantly increases performance of cognitive tasks. So, you think something like Red Bull, which is a capital sugar, you would say. There's research done by Dr. Ellen Discovery, who works up in the north of England, and he's done loads of stuff. Just do a web search for Scully and some glucose, you come up with those results. I will get onto that in a couple of slides. And Moss and Scully found that oxygen inhalation before learning significantly enhanced the recall of learning. Okay, here's a typical word list, very boring. Most psychology word lists that balance all the words at frequency. So we know that all these words are above a certain frequency in English language. If I gave you 10 words like aardvark and umbrella and stuff, there'd be a lot of difficulty to remember than after 2 words, which is more used to something. So we measure all balanced groups. If I showed you this, they're oxygen calling, maybe for a certain amount. Watson Scully found that good people class of oxygen and then asked them to learn this, they do a lot better when they come to treat. However, only improve the benefits of learning stage. So if you've got people to learn that list, gave them a glass of oxygen and then asked them to use it, okay, so there's no help whatsoever. So really the oxygen effect here is helping you consolidate and lay down memories. Even with slightly more complex tasks, these are performing much better with oxygen. This Scully has been doing some research on oxygen with it, and he was approached by a US games company, who eventually went bust, but they had this brilliant idea where it's like Operation Warp set up we have done, and at certain levels, you could use credits instead of buying more weapons or parrots or what have you. You get blocks of oxygen into your face mask. So they approached them to do some research on the effect of oxygen on the cognitive performance of computers. So they used Tetris, where they gave people different levels of oxygen and got them to play Tetris at different levels. And they found out the effect of oxygen on technical electricity that greatly improved performance by up to 40% in some cases. But only at the highest game level. And you really have this interaction between very high load and different tasks and boosting efficiency. Oxygen, these effects are relatively short-lived. Mossetel found optimal oxygen dose was 30 seconds per minute. In fact, like most drugs, oxygen glucose follow an inverted U-shape dose response curve. That means as you start increasing the dose, you get a big peak, it plateaus, and then the more you increase the dose, gives you no additional benefit. And glucose and oxygen work in the same way. Obviously, over a slightly time scale. So oxygen working, the maximum oxygen dose was 30 seconds per minute, and after a few minutes, the oxygen wears off. So metabolites are glucose drinking can cause glucose levels to rise, peak after 30 minutes from now. Okay, so we've kind of got these different curves going on. Okay, so I told you a bit about how we understand how the brain works, some of our psychology itself, how we can use this knowledge to the benefit of people like friends and patients, knowledge, and also the one who find out the stuff and use the power and give that a go. So, get to go home and drink lots of better.
In a quick down, you noticed? I'm collecting tapes, the ones that are full.
Yeah, firstly, think about how you think.
Have you got enough tape left?
Because
okay.
I was already messing with computers to spend all my time thinking how stuff. And something I sat down and started talking about how I was doing. And the same kind of motivation got me. Cognitive neuroscience needs to happen. Like, trouble with psychologists and cognitive neuroscientists is they're not very good at computers. Really, really bad. So if you know about computers, you can use your brain. Go and really put something out. I think a lot of stuff, especially with mechanism and neural nets, involves a lot of programming skill, a lot of pure math and stuff like this. fMRI and tech essentially is just more data that comes out, and there's a whole other math that goes on to turn it into resolutions. So I think we need computation and we need very sharp minds that produce these tools to help us understand and be great at that. Healthy diet will ensure a good baseline of optimal performance. I'm really telling you guys to eat well. I just think it's pointless, but you know, try your best. Not too many pizzas and stuff like that. Small, well-timed increases in glucose and oxygen can improve cognitive performance dramatically. And so if you want to boost, if you've got a very difficult task to undertake, whenever I go for jogging, I've got something ready and go for a walk. I don't actually think that's going to help today, but that idea of simply increasing the metabolism of fuel in the body will help you undertake especially difficult tasks. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so the question was, firstly, glucose is a sugar. It is a small sugar. And if I had to choose between coffee or hot chocolate, what would be best? What would I choose? Simple answer. So whatever you like, how much do you choose? Any other questions? Right.
You didn't say anything about NLP, although I'm pretty sure that that is most close to the hacking and programming.
Yeah, and the question was, now we talked about NLP, which is a technique of neuro-linguistic programming. I'm actually very suspicious of neuro-linguistic programming. It kind of takes ideas about what happens physiologically when we do stuff, and how we can use that to boost cognitive performance or understand what other people are doing, and the sort of stuff like the mind is supposed to be looking to the left and so on and so forth. To be honest, I'm not even slightly convinced by it. I know some people who are more convinced, but I've looked at some of the stuff and I think it's a bit kind of put together. The conceptual leaps they make between the neuroscience and the behaviour, I think are too great as well. So I'm not a big fan. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work for some people.
I've seen algorithms that are used to train artificial neural networks. But how does it work in our brain? Because I know these algorithms definitely won't work in our brain.
Okay. The question was that under algorithms to train artificial neural networks, how does it work in our brain? When we saw the picture of the neural net up there, this is like we call it a metaphor, a computational metaphor, because no one believes that each of these is really single neurons. And we have this big problem. We're in a diagram where all the activation spread forward and then the error propagated backwards. The neurons don't do that. The neurons don't propagate back. They don't send reverse signals. So really it's a metaphor of computation. So we can think of a metaphor of lots of single computational nodes coming together and creating an emergent property which may be thought or understanding or a cognitive process and so on. So when we create artificial neural networks, we're not really going, this is a model of the brain, we're going, this is a model of how distributed cognition may take this task and complete. Questions? Go ahead. Yeah, the question is, with oxygen, should we be breathing regularly or fasting air when we do exercise? We noticed that when people did some good research done with heart rate and cognitive performance, and they find that if you undertake very difficult mental tasks, your heart rate increases, and this gives you an increased oxygen glucose supply to the brain. This is another good reason why high-fat diets are bad, because not only do they stop glucose metabolism in the brain, but also the heart provides constant fuel. So, yeah. Okay, any more questions?
What do you think about adapting our thinking method that's more adaptive, it's more fit for the brain, how the brain works?
Oh, okay. So, fitting the software to the hardware. The question is, what do you think about thought methods which better fit how the brain works? The brain isn't a computer and it doesn't have any set rules, so you can't really think in a way that takes advantage of the hardware, because as the point I went out from Christopher Koch is that really neurons adapt and the brain is very good at adapting, especially in young children. You can case studies of 8-year-old girl who has social epilepsy, also less tendency to
Yeah, the network will shut down.
by the age of 16, she was taking a GCSE.
You have enough text?
Yeah, this is almost
No, I don't need it.
Well, because she had
These are far.
Yeah.
You have one inside?
Yeah, and 39 minutes to wait. This one.
and so on. What this shows us is
Just
that
push your
the brain adapts to the way it's used.
When you jump down, go.
As far as I know, brain is very good at information. If you use a system that optimizes the property, does it increase your
Yes and no. The thing is, saying the brain is very good at pattern matching is very true, but that's like saying computers are very good at having. It's a very low-level property, and that property is used to create a lot of things. So people say, can we use perhaps more distinct patterns? And maybe some people can and some people can't. But it's very difficult to say that this particular way of doing things will work for everybody. And at the end of the day, it's the whole practice makes perfect. In that doing something like audio typewriter, some people may find very, very easy to have done it many times. I would find very difficult to have many times before. And in fact, if you do something like time, it becomes second brain. You can actually get people who have what we dissociation between, say, reading and writing, so they can read but they can't write, or vice versa. And this is after brain damage. So that tells us there's an area of the brain specifically involved in reading and writing. If you think we've only really had this skill for 200 years, you can't really argue that we were born with a reading or writing bit of brain. So what this tells us is that through experience of reading and writing, the brain is adapted and it's actually grown, you might say, in areas specifically involved in this. How am I doing for time? Okay, we'll have one question.
I can see that the problem approach is
Okay, consciousness is one of these things. I was talking about a guy, the question was, what's my favourite theory of consciousness? This is like a big hot topic at the moment in all sorts of neuroscience. I was talking about Francis Crick being really Nobel Prize for alone saying lots of stuff about consciousness. And if you want to write a book about consciousness, go ahead and do it because you're just as qualified as anyone else. No one really knows anyone here what we're talking about. And in fact, what people tend to do is, if you're a famous memory neuroscientist, you just write a book and say it's in memory. If you're a famous visual neuroscientist, say it's in vision. So just go out and spend some years and people will read it. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. So, going forward.
Smart here, everything's finished here for a night, so we're okay.